When we think about Victorian furniture, we often think about dark wood and stains, elaborate carvings, and a lot of flair. And a lot of times you may notice that there's a specific character that often pops up in a lot of Victorian furniture. That's right, friends. Today we're going to be talking about lion faces and carvings and why it often pops up in a lot of Victorian pieces and history. Hey friends, my name is Jeremy. I'm an artist, an illustrator, and I also love to collect and sell vintage and antique goods. And I have a huge love and fascination with the Victorian era, Edwardian, and also the Gilded Age. Also, I'm a huge collector and fan of vintage and antique Halloween, so of course, the Victorian era is one of my favorites. Today, we're going to talk about these majestic motifs and why they often popped up in a lot of Victorian pieces and history, and what the significance behind all of it is. When you think about lions, you often think about how they relate to power, nobility, stability, and all the strength that goes behind them. And very similar to how much power and strength and nobility the lions have in the animal kingdom, Victorians often wanted to feel that way as well to show off their wealth and power. Incorporating and carving lion faces into their furniture and decor often meant that they were showing their power and prestige that they had in society. So yes, they were showing off the lion's face and its figure and how beautiful it was, but also, friends, they were definitely showing off their power and what wealth they had within their own home. Of course, it was not just decorative, it was a symbol and a way to show off their dominance, both personal and imperial. Incorporating lion faces into furniture often reflected a desire to show off their wealth, their power, and also their standing in society. High social standing, I should say. And then you also have to remember the Victorian era, whether it happened in England or here in the US, was heavily influenced by British imperialism. When you think about the British and their coats of arms and a lot of their decor, of course, a lot of that also had lion figures within the decor itself. And who ran shit over there in Britain? Obviously, the royals. Now, though Victorians were really creative and they made some beautiful decor and decorated their homes and lifestyles in the most beautiful manner, we cannot just give them full credit because they definitely pulled inspiration from many other periods and decor styles as well from history. You have Gothic, Renaissance, the medieval periods, and of course you cannot forget Greek and Roman classical art that pulled a lot of inspiration into the Victorian theme. You'll see a lot of that inspiration come out into a lot of the intricate pieces where you would see the lion faces, you would also see it amongst the borders and other carvings on the furniture and decor. And a lot of these styles, like the medieval period, the Greek and Roman art, and the Gothic pieces, it very prominently had a lion faces in a lot of the decor, whether it was the coat of arms, thrones, or an actual tapestry. So it was a very natural thing for Victorians to want to bring this into their homes as well in a different way. So they definitely embraced the revivalism, a lot of these period and their art and history, and decided to bring it into their own homes with a very big highlight on lion motifs. And it was definitely a very natural fit for this new Victorian decor, which was often an ode to a lot of the history, art, and period pieces that they loved from other eras as well. So it made it a natural fit for this revivalist decor. The word exotic is not one that I'm a huge fan of, but the British Empire and the Victorian folks were definitely a huge fan of exotic things, or exotic to them, I should say. Oftentimes, the word exotic is used to describe things that are not natural to you or to your community, or that you did not grow up around. And a lot of time it has to do with people in other ethnicities and races. And that is no different what happened here with the British Empire, its folks, and the Victorian era. They were definitely obsessed with exoticism. There was a huge fascination with exotic things that came from Asia and Africa. And what do you have a lot of over there? Lions. Now, we cannot neglect what happened in these eras, which happened to be slavery and colonialism, and that will often bleed into why a lot of the decor from these other countries and continents ended up coming here to the States. On top of the slavery and colonialism, you also had the conquering of different animals, one of those being lions. And you'll see that art in a lot of historical pieces. You often see warriors fighting with lions or lions fighting with the warriors. And a huge thing with hunters was obviously saving the animals once they, and using them as trophies. And what happens when you conquer something and you use that trophy, you're often using that to display your wealth and your strength and your power, which again goes back to colonizing the British Empire and how they were conquering many other continents and displaying these motifs to show their power and strength. Displaying these motifs reflected Britain's global reach and colonization, as well as their romance for the exotic, wild and untamed things. Oftentimes when you look at history and art pieces that highlight lions and lionesses, you'll see that they often highlight how exotic and majestic they are for the beings that they are. You'll see the fascination with how exotic they are, their beauty, their power, and obviously how majestic these beings are. In a lot of historical art pieces, you will see that they often relate to Asia and Africa, which you can see a lot of tapestries, chinoiserie. Lions, the animal kingdom, the British Empire, and other continents being colonized go hand in hand essentially. Now, lions weren't just about power and their strength or the empire that was coming around conquering everything. To many others, like those in Africa and Asia, lions symbolized moral values like courage, protection, and vigilance. For Victorians who valued a morally upright and orderly home, having lions, decor, and motifs around their homes obviously reinforced that idea of a household that was strong, full of virtue and stability, and had power in their society. And also, Victorians just really loved their homes and they kept it in tip-top shape. Because you best believe having those lion motifs along with the other beautiful decor and having it in tip-top shape meant that when your guests were coming over, they were definitely going to leave respecting you even more than they had come. Now, besides all the respect and power and the meaning that the lions had, you cannot go into a Victorian home or pick up a piece of Victorian furniture history and ignore the fact that the Victorian era had probably one of the best eras of craftsmanship. And it truly is a statement of craftsmanship throughout history. Because let's be honest, carving a lion head into a piece of wood is not easy one bit. Back then, there was no YouTube or TikTok or video tutorials to show you how to carve a freaking lion face into a really thick piece of wood. The wood that they make nowadays is not as good as you would find in Victorian homes and decor. Let's face it, that mass-produced piece that you're buying nowadays with a lion face on it is probably gonna get knocked and chipped by a shoulder. Back then, they were not breaking, and that takes a lot of skill and learning throughout history from the craftsmen that were making them. Nowadays, making something like that would cost an extravagant amount of money, but back then it was also a way to show off your wealth. And I guess to similar nowadays, you would have a really nice house if you spent a lot of millions of dollars on it and got all the things carved into it. Back then it was very much the same thing. Fine craftsmen were looked and searched for and sought after by all the wealthy folk. That is why when you go into places like the Mark Twain house, or when you go to the UK and go to a beautiful Victorian home, you're gonna find some beautifully carved intricate pieces, because these craftsmen, they took their time, they learned their skills, and they brought you some of the most beautiful pieces in history. Now, back then, even though there were Victorians that loved to show off their money and let you know that they were wealthy, having pieces like a lion motif were also a beautiful way of showing off your wealth in a very respectable manner. It was a subtle way of letting you know, hey, I got some money in the bank. I got this lion carved into a piece of wood just to show you. Such ornate details showcase the skill of the person that made it, the capabilities of that artisan, and also the owner that owned that furniture piece. Or should I say the financial means of that furniture owner. Now, last but not least, showing off the wealth of purchasing it, hiring the craftsmen to make it, the history behind it all. You also have the psychological meaning behind of a lion motif. Placing lion motifs on chairs, on roofs, on exterior and interior decor, heck, even a cabinet door or tapestry. It added a sense of security and dominance within the home. They made furniture pieces in your home feel more like a throne, a meaningful place to sit and relax, and also as if you are protected, because going back to the animal kingdom, the lion is one of the most strongest animals within the kingdom, and they barely back down to an enemy, and many times they win. So having that power and strength of stability in your home within a decor piece also helped you feel that within yourself. And I'm sure the guests also felt it when they stepped in there as well. And going back to the Gothicness of it all, Victorians were very spiritual people. Not necessarily religious, but very spiritual. And so obviously this heavily influenced the many faces you would see in the home decor, which we will go into in another video. But just like the lion motif, they often use these faces to ward off evil spirits and ghosts and things that they fear. And not only did Victorians fear the dead and the spirits, but they also had a very meaningful relationship with the spirits and those loved ones that passed. You often see this in mourning rings where they collect hair. They also have framed pieces with their children's hair, their tombstones. There's a lot of meaning behind the motifs and the way they celebrated the dead after they passed. They definitely expressed their anxieties around the supernatural and the afterlife, and again you would see this in all of the decor within a Victorian home, but that is for another video. And oftentimes a lion motif, head, and a very scary mouthful of teeth on a piece of wood often was used to ward off the evil spirits that they believed may be around. And as a lover of history and antique Halloween, this warms my heart so much to learn about. Next time you see a Victorian piece of furniture, or you're visiting a Victorian home, or you're on Facebook Marketplace searching for a Victorian era piece, and you just so happen to see a lion carved into the armrest or a piece of the wood, remember it's more than just decoration. It's a bold statement of identity, morality, ambition, and strength. And their identity has a lot of meaning behind it. The lion may be silent, but in Victorian furniture, it definitely roars.